Hello and welcome back to this virtual lab series on Entity Hierarchy, how to measure risk across your entire organisation. In this three-part series, I demonstrate how to model and filter, generate a map, assess and monitor so that you can better respond to the risk across your enterprise. Welcome to Chapter 2, Generate a Map. In Chapter 1, we built our dependency model based on the organisational hierarchy defined during the process workshop. This provides the rules for the dependency map so that entity relationships can be defined based on the entity classes. We defined the entity types so that entities can be generated and classified. So now we need to generate those entities and create the dependency map. Let's review each of the entity types we just created. Because the entity filter has changed, we can click Update Entities from Filters rather than wait for the scheduled job to run, which by default executes every hour. This will run for the specific entity type, so let's start with organisation. As there is only one company set to primary, per the condition of the entity filter, this entity type will only generate a single entity. We can review the entity to validate the class is set to organisation and the ownership is coming from the contact field on the source company record. We will click the same quickly for each entity type, departments and departmental applications, and then come back to review these entities. In departments, we have 3 entities as expected. Going down the list using the incremental arrow, we can see 8 entities for our applications, and for each of the mapped risk statements there are 8 risks, 1 for each of the entities. Similarly, for controls, we have 1 for each entity for each control objective. Todo in orden. Now, let's jump over to the workbench and review the dependency model. Recall from Chapter 1 that business application rolls up to department and department rolls up to organisation. With that in mind, we can start creating the dependency map, which is how upstream and downstream entities are defined. Of course, we are going to start with Swando, the primary company record in our root organisation class. Everything will roll up here. This is the key to reporting risk across the organisation. Once selected, we can see the eligible dependencies for up and downstream by entity class. So we can now drag each entity onto the bottom half of the Swando entity to create the downstream relationship for each department. And then for each department we select, we can see the eligible dependencies allows us to select entities in the business application class. Sometimes the workbench is a bit fiddly, but for getting started and manually creating your dependency map, it is the best way as you can build and visualize as you go. We've done the art department, now we are doing music. And who doesn't love karaoke? This application had to be owned by Chuck. If you didn't know, there is a karaoke app which is running on ServiceNow. Finally, with technology completed, we can move on to review the results of this dependency mapping. Remember, we only generated risks and controls using the entity type for these applications. Now, if we jump into the classic UI and review the forms and lists, we can see the upstream and downstream entity relationships which have been created. From the Swando entity, we can see 11 downstream entities, which includes both departments and applications. Although it looks rather flat, the eagle-eyed amongst us will also see the 8 risks and 8 controls. More on that later. In the risk workspace, in the record page for the Swando entity, using the sidebar, we can see the downstream hierarchy nested in a folder structure. We can also see the related entity types at each level. We can use this sidebar to navigate up and down throughout the entity hierarchy. There is also space available on this contextual side panel to extend for additional use cases. Thank you for joining me in Chapter 2, where we have generated entities from filters and created our dependency map.